this could be a Trojan horse that the CRTC should pay very close attention to.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. My guest is Harvey Oberfeld, a retired but still issue-engaged TV reporter. Welcome to the show, Harvey.
Hi.
I noticed on your blog, Keeping It Real, that you're calling the proposal by Global to set up a national TV news network perhaps a Trojan horse that the CRTC should be very careful about receiving.
Absolutely. And of course the word is perhaps, because we don't know what their long-term plans are. But on one hand, I was very happy to hear that somebody's talking about a 24-hour national news channel. I've been very concerned about the decline of news on television, both in quantity as well as quality. And if somebody can add another news channel 24 hours right across the country, I, on one hand, would love to look at that because I'm interested in more news, and especially I even enjoy watching what's going on in communities across the country. I like seeing stories from Montreal or Ottawa or St. John's. It helps bring the country together. So on one hand, I'm very, very happy to see that proposal. But knowing the way the media have been acting towards news, I'm very suspicious, and I think the CRTC should be suspicious as well.
And we should make it clear this proposal is by Shaw Communications, the people who own Global Television.
That's right. That's right. And they already operate Global, Global One or on Channel 21. BC1, and that's a 24-hour news station. I don't know how well it's done. I haven't seen any great ratings for them. I haven't seen any ratings for them. They certainly are not making that very public. I do know one of the problems they have is that their arch rival TELUS has apparently declined to carry it on any TELUS services. So if you can't get the channel, that does hurt the ratings a bit. But you can get it on Shaw, and of course it's part of the Shaw package. And this national newscast would be somewhat similar. I'm not sure whether it would replace BC1 with the national news channel. I suspect it would. But my real concern is what it would do to news on the other network channels across the country, on the main network channels. And that's why I think this could be a Trojan horse that the CRTC should pay very close attention to.
Right, and of course, CTV has a national news network, CBC Television has a national news network. Have they trimmed back their local newsrooms because they have this overall umbrella? And is that the fear if Global starts its 24-hour news stations?
Well, CBC has trimmed back. They say it's for economic reasons, but they have trimmed back their coverage on their local station. CTV, as far as I could see, nothing so far. But CTV is owned by Bell Media, and Bell Media was one of the companies complaining to the CRTC not that long ago that they're losing money on news, and they even suggested that Canadians might have to pay for the basic stations because they're not making money on many of their news programs and that. Of course, we know they're making a fortune on a lot of their American programs. These are not companies that are in need of charity, and they don't seem to understand that the news portion of their Canadian programming as part of their CanCon commitment and requirement, that's what they pay out. In other words, so they can bring in the millions and millions and millions they bring into their coffers by broadcasting American programming the rest of the day. So it's kind of a trade-off. Now, my fear is that if Shaw gets this national news channel, will they be first to sort of suggest, well, we'd like to move all our news shows to this new national news channel and free up the regular channel to carry more American broadcasting. And they would do that by suggesting to the CRTC that why don't they look at their total Canadian content in totality between the two stations? In other words, get credit on their main network station for CanCon carried on their BC or their national news channel. And if they could get that, if they could swing that through the CRTC, that would allow them to get rid of the news programming, or at least most of it, or some of it, but certainly most of it, on their regular channel, move it over to the national channel, and then fill in the gap with more imported U.S. programming. So in a way, what you'd end up with, you'd actually be, they would be competing with themselves, because let's say the news hour was on at 6 o'clock on the national news channel, but at 6 o'clock on the main channel, they brought in some American drama or reality show or something that people might want to watch more than the news. So they would actually be competing with themselves. And certainly if people tuned into the American channel rather than the news, then it would be money-making for them, but I don't think it would be good for the community overall.
We'll have more with Harvey Oberfeld right after this.
More and more people are looking to the Internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're chatting with Harvey Oberfeld. You claim to be retired, Harvey, but you're still pretty busy there on the Internet with your blog, Keeping It Real.
Well, it's very scary in a way, you know. I mean, I haven't checked the month of September, but I know I checked a couple of months ago, and we have like 70,000 people who are watching or tuning into this blog and commenting and taking part, and I know a lot of them are people in positions of authority and power throughout the province. It's getting a lot of attention, and it really is just a hobby. There's no ads, there's no revenue. And between you and I and a few people listening in here, I'm actually shutting it down in a couple of weeks for at least a month because I'm going traveling. But when it's up and going, it is getting a lot of attention, and it's quite flattering, and we get some pretty good discussions going on there.
On this television news discussion, I remember when TV news was considered a public service. We're talking when it first started in the 40s, in the 50s, the 60s. But going into the 70s, remember the movie Network, I'm As Mad as Hell?
Right, and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Well, that was about TV news becoming show business rather than giving you the news. And now George Clooney's wedding gets the headlines, and the Prime Minister's assassination is a poor second.
Well, the way I look at it, we seem to be about 10, 15 years behind the American stations. When I was working before I retired, we used to look at what they put on as local news in the States, and we used to laugh at them and despair of what they were doing to local news. But really, 10 years later or so, you take a look at local news here in Canada, and I know Vancouver best. I mean, it's a lot of police blotter crud. I mean, it really is. It's just give us, sort of get the news out there that everybody wants to see that's easy and cheap to do. You know, you get sort of things like, police, fire, ambulance, press conferences, run, walk, bike, anything you can do for any kind of charity. It's all fluff, I mean, a lot of it. And, the serious journalism, the investigative stuff, the chasing politicians down the hall. There's one reporter I see covering politics. I don't think he ever leaves his desk. I mean, it's become very lazy, generally speaking. It's become very, let's do what we can instantly, as cheap as possible. And of course, then the viewers aren't tuning in. And then they say, well, look, why are we spending money on this? Because nobody's tuning in. But if you're giving people crud, then of course they're not going to tune in. But if you put out a quality product with quality reporters and quality writers, I mean, that's the other thing, who know how to write, who know how to use pictures, people will tune in. I mean, 60 Minutes still draws a huge audience. Good news, Comedy Central draws a huge audience. Well, if people like that can draw a huge audience, why can't real news draw a good audience by presenting good quality news? And that's my fear with this 24-hour news channel. By shunting it off to a side channel that you might even have to pay for if you want it, then what happens is there's even less incentive to put a lot of money into the news and into broadcasting and quality reporting. And I really worry that we are losing the community service aspect of presenting news in the community. And I think the CRTC has to be very careful to guard against that.
Another thing too, I'm sure in the application that they haven't mentioned is the companies like Shaw, they own the History Channel and several other channels. They don't have newscasts. They're not sending anybody out to cover the latest fire or dig into the latest political scandal. And they're making cash hand over fist. Do they take that into account and maybe just but they say the local news is losing money. We got to get rid of it.
Well, one of the interesting things that Shaw has proposed, quite apart from its national news national news proposal, is they are in current negotiations in Vancouver with the union there, and they have proposed that they would like to be able to use what they call Shaw Media material on the news hour, for example. Well, what Shaw Media material is, that could be stuff done by volunteers on Cable 4 or any part-time workers over at the cable station, or even stuff they've done in studio somewhere, promotional stuff for various companies or who knows, or community groups. They'd like to take that material and pump it onto the news hour if they so desire. Well, of course, that, in my view, would just even lower the quality of what they're already giving, and also it's a way of getting around the union. Instead of having serious, reporters who are hired to do the job, you just take all this stuff pumped out, a lot of stuff pumped out by your volunteers at Cable 4, and put it on the news hour and fill up the show. And of course, what that would lead to, I believe, would be fewer and fewer people watching, and then they can go to the CRTC and say, look, nobody's watching, so why are we being required to provide this? So I think people have to be very careful about that sort of thing, and we used to look to the CRTC to enforce the Canadian content rules with news and public affairs as a sort of a trade-off for the American programming they could bring in. But in Vancouver they started off by allowing CKVU, remember UTV? First of all, they were allowed to discontinue pretty well most of their news. I think they have a little in the morning show, but during the day they have no news shows that I'm aware of. So they allowed them to get rid of it. And then the other stations are looking, well, if they don't have to do it, why do we have to do it? And so that's a very dangerous precedent the CRTC set years ago, and I don't think they're doing their job properly to protect Canadian content in the form of news programming and service to the local community. And that's what concerns me.
What about the CRTC's current battle with Netflix and YouTube?
Well, I've only followed that from a point of view of periphery interest, in that when the CRTC demanded information from Netflix, this huge American corporation, told them where to go, and they weren't giving them the information. And so now this great bureaucracy in Ottawa and in Hull, demanding, which is so used to making all kinds of demands and being catered to and bowed to but scraped to by Canadian broadcast companies, has sort of been told where to get off by this American conglomerate, and it'll be very interesting to see what they do now. But I don't think there's much they could do that they would get away with.
No, the Prime Minister said he's against regulating the Internet, and that's exactly what they would be doing because their programming is online.
Exactly. So it's very hard to for them to take that one on. But that doesn't bother me or interest me as much as what's going on television. That's especially with regards to news. Harvey,
thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Welcome.
Check out Harvey's blog, Keeping It Real, on his website, harveyoberfeld.ca. You're listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. You can find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Comments about the show can be sent to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.